You didn't build your emotional walls to isolate yourself. You built them because at some point in your life you had no choice. The human psyche has one essential job: to ensure your survival. When confronted with neglect, betrayal, or emotional pain, especially in childhood, your mind responded by constructing invisible defenses. Carl Jung called these protective barriers complexes, emotional structures formed around deep, unhealed wounds. Maybe you experienced rejection so painful that shutting down your feelings seemed safer than feeling them fully. Maybe your caregivers were emotionally absent, chaotic, or even abusive. So you learned early on that vulnerability was dangerous. In response, your psyche did what it does best: it adapted. It built walls of numbness, self-reliance, perfectionism, and emotional detachment, keeping you safe at a time when safety was desperately needed. But these walls, initially built for protection, become part of your subconscious architecture. They persist into adulthood, quietly influencing every aspect of your life. What began as necessary protection evolves into isolation, emotional disconnection, and the silent suffering of feeling unseen and misunderstood. You may notice symptoms like a chronic inability to trust others fully, a subtle yet constant loneliness even when surrounded by people, or a rigid sense of control that leaves little room for spontaneity or joy. Each of these symptoms points to armor that once saved you but is now holding you captive. Jung famously said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Your emotional armor is exactly that, a shield designed to prevent you from ever facing the pain buried deep within. Yet this same shield is the very thing keeping you from experiencing true connection, intimacy, and emotional freedom. Understanding why you built these walls is the first step in dismantling them. Your walls are not proof of brokenness, they're proof of resilience. They're evidence of a child who did whatever it took to survive. But the question now becomes, are these walls still necessary? Or are they relics of a past you no longer inhabit? The paradox of emotional armor is that the very protection it offers eventually becomes the cage you're desperate to escape. In childhood, these defenses shielded you from overwhelming pain, chaos, or neglect. But as an adult, that same armor, those same emotional walls, begin to suffocate your growth, isolating you from genuine human connection and emotional authenticity. Think of your psychological defenses as a suit of armor. Initially, the armor protects a knight in battle, shielding him from harm. But over time, armor rusts, becoming heavy and limits movement. Soon, the knight finds himself unable to move freely, trapped within the very thing meant to ensure his survival. This vivid metaphor illustrates precisely how emotional defenses operate. What started as necessary protection has morphed into a barrier that confines your emotional mobility and growth. You might recognize signs of this entrapment in your life. Persistent feelings of emptiness, difficulty forming meaningful relationships, or a perpetual sense of isolation, even amid friends and family. Perhaps you've confused emotional numbness with strength, believing the absence of feeling equates to mastery over life's difficulties. But emotional control is not the same as emotional freedom. True maturity involves the ability to feel deeply, to remain present and vulnerable even when emotions are difficult. Your defenses promised safety, but they delivered isolation and disconnection instead. André Berthiaume poignantly stated, "We all wear masks, and the time comes when we cannot remove them without removing some of our own skin." Your defenses, your masks, have fused with your identity, making you believe they are inseparable from who you are. But beneath these layers of emotional protection lies your authentic self, a self longing to be freed, seen, and truly known. Recognizing that your emotional protection has become your cage is the first essential step toward reclaiming your freedom. The armor was never intended to be permanent. It served a purpose, yes, but now it's time to consider letting it go, slowly, carefully, and compassionately. The emotional walls you've constructed provide an illusion of safety. But what price have you paid for that security? The cost of emotional protection is far higher than many of us realize. It quietly manifests as lost intimacy, unfulfilled connections, and an internal emptiness masked by the facade of strength and control. When you prioritize emotional safety above all else, you're inadvertently cutting yourself off from genuine human experiences. The walls that guard against pain also block out joy, love, spontaneity, and deep connection. Your relationships remain superficial, friendships feel transactional, and romantic bonds lack true emotional depth. This protective approach breeds loneliness even amid companionship because genuine connection requires vulnerability, the very thing your armor denies. Behind your emotional defenses lies a hidden grief, the grief of a life unlived, emotions unfelt, and opportunities lost. It's an invisible mourning for the experiences you consciously or subconsciously avoided to remain in control. Trauma survivors, in particular, often build highly structured lives, believing order and predictability will shield them from chaos. But life itself is inherently unpredictable, and this rigidity ultimately robs you of the very aliveness you crave. Carl Jung offered a profound insight into this internal contradiction. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Your emotional defenses are unconscious forces shaping your reality, subtly influencing decisions, relationships, and even your sense of identity. Left unexamined, they become your prison rather than your refuge. Real safety doesn't come from avoidance. It arises through integration. Facing your buried wounds, learning to gently confront your past, and slowly dismantling the walls you've built are essential steps toward emotional freedom. Only by acknowledging and processing your pain can you begin reclaiming the full range of human experience, transforming perceived weakness into genuine strength. Now that you've recognized the emotional walls that keep you isolated and detached, the next critical question is, how do you begin dismantling them? Lowering your defenses isn't about exposing yourself recklessly. It's about cautiously exploring vulnerability and learning that it can coexist with safety. First, understand your defenses. Begin to notice situations where your emotional walls instinctively rise, perhaps when you're criticized, rejected, or faced with intimacy. Awareness itself is a powerful step. By simply observing your reactions without judgment, you gain a clearer view of the barriers you've erected. Next, gently question your walls through journaling or reflection. Ask yourself honest questions like, what am I afraid people would see if I truly let my guard down? Or, what past experiences taught me that emotional openness was dangerous? Writing these responses can illuminate deeply held beliefs and fears that keep your defenses intact. Start practicing small acts of emotional bravery. Share a genuine feeling with someone you trust. Admit uncertainty, or allow yourself to receive help without feeling shame. Small risks taken consistently begin to chip away at the armor you've worn for years, gradually building your internal sense of security. Remember Jung's words, "Only the wounded physician heals." Your journey of emotional healing involves becoming your own compassionate healer, one who acknowledges past wounds, respects the strength you've demonstrated in enduring them, and now offers a new kind of safety based on genuine self-awareness rather than rigid defenses. Letting down your walls doesn't mean becoming defenseless. It means exchanging a brittle, isolating strength for genuine emotional resilience, a strength rooted in vulnerability, authenticity, and the courage to embrace your true self. As you begin the courageous process of dismantling your emotional walls, a new self starts to emerge. A self that was hidden, waiting patiently behind the protective layers you've carried for years. This self isn't weaker for its vulnerability. Rather, it is profoundly strong, deeply authentic, and genuinely connected to life. Reclaiming your authentic self involves reintegrating parts of you that were long abandoned. The inner child who felt unsafe, the shadow that was deemed unacceptable, and the vulnerable self that learned to hide away. Integration means recognizing these aspects not as flaws, but as vital components of your humanity. Realize that power and vulnerability are not opposites. True power embraces vulnerability because it understands that emotional openness and authenticity are sources of deep strength. It's not about avoiding pain or uncertainty, but learning to navigate these experiences with resilience and honesty. Imagine living a life where you're free to be fully yourself, unburdened by the constant vigilance and rigid control. Imagine relationships grounded in genuine intimacy, friendships characterized by deep mutual understanding, and a daily experience of life rich with emotional depth and connection. As Carl Jung observed, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You've carried your emotional armor long enough. Now it's time to embrace the freedom that comes from releasing the old defenses and stepping into the fullness of who you truly are. The walls you built to survive are no longer needed. Now it's time to learn how to truly live.
If this resonated with you, feel free to leave a like or a comment. It helps more than you think. And it tells the algorithm to keep showing this kind of content to people who might need it.